The gallery opening was supposed to be my escape. For 3 years, I'd painted in solitude. My apartment, my studio, nowhere but the tight corners where no one could find me. But Marco Russo, the gallery owner, had convinced me that anonymity was wasting art. So I'd agreed to display 5 pieces under the pseudonym E. Rossi, and I'd promised myself I wouldn't come. I came anyway. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood in the corner of the Luciano Gallery, white wine untouched in my hand, watching people I didn't know discuss paintings that had cost me pieces of my soul. The marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured shadows across oil paintings of women in various states of breaking. I recognized myself in every one. "She's here," Marco whispered, materializing beside me in that sudden way gallery owners do. He was beaming, proud, completely oblivious to how much I wanted to disappear. "The woman who bought the largest piece. She's—" "Marco, I can't—" "You can. She's in the back gallery. Just talk to her for 5 minutes." I was gathering a polite refusal when I saw him. He wasn't looking at the paintings. He was looking at me. The man was tall enough that his head broke the horizon of the crowd. Dark hair, expensive suit the color of ink, eyes like winter. He stood perfectly still while everyone else moved around him like water around stone. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. Neither did I, and that was the first mistake. Marco had already drifted toward a collector, leaving me alone with my racing heart and the sensation that I'd been cataloged and filed away in some dangerous mental archive. The man turned back to the painting, one of mine, a woman's face half submerged in shadow, and tilted his head as though reading something written there. I left the gallery. I shouldn't have, because leaving made me predictable. I took the street exit into the March darkness, my heels clicking too loud against stone. The neighborhood was upscale, residential, supposedly safe. Supposedly. I was already reaching for my phone to call a cab when the hand closed around my wrist. "Don't scream." Not a question. I turned, and it wasn't the dark-eyed man. This one was broader, rougher, with a scar that split one eyebrow in half. My stomach dropped into my feet. "What do you want?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Message," he said. "Your father owes money, your insurance." He pulled me toward a car, a black sedan, windows tinted, anonymous as a coffin. And I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. It was a raw sound, primal, the kind of scream that comes from a body that knows it's about to be disappeared. For a moment, the street was silent, except for that sound echoing between buildings. Then everything happened at once. A second figure materialized from the darkness. Not the scarred man, someone else, smaller, with a gun drawn so casually it might have been a pen. The scarred man's hand loosened on my wrist, and I stumbled backward, gasping. But that wasn't the moment. The moment came when the man from the gallery rounded the corner at a full walk. Not a run, which somehow made it worse. He moved like gravity itself, bent toward him. His eyes found the scarred man with the precision of a sniper, and something in his expression shifted. It was subtle, a tightening at the jaw, a slight curling of his fingers. "Let her go," he said. Conversational, polite, almost. The scarred man's hand tightened on my wrist. "Not your problem, Moretti." Moretti. Even his name was dangerous. "She was in my gallery." His eyes flicked to me for half a second. A brief assessment, checking for blood, for visible damage. "That makes her my problem." "Her father." "I don't care about her father." And then, I still don't know exactly how it happened, the scarred man released my wrist and reached for something in his jacket. Maybe a gun. Maybe something else. Maybe it didn't matter. Vittorio Moretti cracked his knuckles. The sound was crisp, deliberate, a pianist warming up before a concerto. He did it slowly, methodically, his eyes never leaving the scarred man's face. "If you touch her again," he said, each word a separate sentence, "I'm going to break every bone in your hands, then your arms, then I'm going to take a very long time with your legs. And I want you to understand, right now, that I have an excellent understanding of human anatomy and a deep appreciation for precision work." The scarred man's hand froze. "Let me be clear," Vittorio continued. "She begged me." He glanced at me, and in that glance was a question I didn't have time to answer, "not to let you hurt her. So I'm asking you very gently, do you want to test me? Or would you like to get back in that car and drive away from this street?" The threat was so quiet, so rational, so absolutely certain in its delivery that it was more terrifying than any scream. The scarred man got back in the car. The second figure with the gun had already vanished into shadow. The sedan pulled away from the curb, and then there was nothing but me and Vittorio Moretti on a dark street, and my lungs working like they might never stop. "Did he hurt you?" His voice had shifted, the threat gone, replaced by something almost gentle. Almost. Not quite. I shook my head. "I'm Vittorio." He didn't offer his hand. He knew his hands were dangerous right now, shaking slightly with adrenaline and the specific kind of violence that hadn't been used yet. "And you're going to come with me. I don't... Not a request." The car was a black Mercedes, and it smelled like expensive leather and sandalwood. I sat in the back seat, pressed against the window, watching the city slide past in streaks of amber and shadow. Vittorio didn't sit next to me. He sat across, perfectly at ease, like kidnapping terrified young women was part of his daily schedule. Maybe it was. "Your name," he said. Not a question. "Elena." "Elena what?" "Russo." Something flickered in his expression, recognition, calculation, a door opening and closing. "Any relation to Marco Russo?" "No, why?" "The gallery owner shares your last name." "It's not uncommon in..." "It is, actually, very uncommon in this context." He pulled out his phone, typed something with his thumb, and then pocketed it. "Your father is Carmine Russo?" My stomach twisted. Of course. Of course he knew. Of course this was about my father. "He's not my father," I said quietly. "Not anymore. He was 15 years ago. Things change." Vittorio leaned back against the seat, his winter-dark eyes studying me like I was one of my own paintings, something broken that needed to be examined from every angle to understand the fracture. "Your father owes a significant amount of money to very specific people, people who don't generally accept excuses. He spent it on women, gambling, generally destroying his life in the way that men like him do. So now those people are looking for leverage. He doesn't know where I am. I haven't spoken to him since you were 17. I'm aware." The specificity of it made my skin prickle. How many files had he opened? How many phone records had he reviewed? How deeply had he already dug into the architecture of my life? "What do you want from me?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. "Nothing. Yet." He said it like a promise and a threat braided together. "Right now, I want to keep you alive." "Because?" "Because your father's debts are to the Castellano family, and I have a reason to care about what the Castellano family wants. More importantly, I have a reason to care about what they don't get." The car turned onto a street I didn't recognize. We were moving away from the city center, toward the coast, toward money that had learned to hide itself. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere safe." "Your house?" "My house." There was no universe in which this was okay. There was no timeline in which I should be anywhere near this man, Vittorio Moretti, clearly powerful, clearly connected to the kind of violence that moved through the world like electricity through water. And yet, as I sat in the back of his car, my heart was doing something strange. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was fear and something else. It was the way he'd looked at my painting in the gallery. It was the way he'd stepped in front of that gun with no hesitation. It was the way his voice had changed when he asked if I was hurt. Fear and fascination, braided together, dangerous as electricity. The Mercedes pulled through iron gates and up a long driveway lined with cypress trees. The house emerged from the darkness like something from a fever dream, all stone and glass, modern but rooted, expensive but austere. Not the home of someone who needed to advertise their power, someone who had so much power they could afford to be quiet about it. Vittorio led me inside without touching me, which was somehow worse than if he had. His hands stayed in his pockets. His eyes stayed forward. He was making a point. "I'm not touching you because I choose not to, not because I couldn't." The interior was all clean lines and restrained luxury. A living room with a view of the dark Atlantic, a kitchen made of marble and steel, a staircase that split the open space like a spine. Everything was immaculate, unlived in almost, except for the small details that suggested a life happening somewhere else in the architecture of this house. A book on a side table, open face down. A coffee cup from this morning, still in the kitchen sink. "There's a guest room upstairs," he said. "Second door on the right. You'll stay there tonight. And then? Then we figure out what to do with you." He said it like I was a problem to be solved, not a person. And I hated that I felt a small twinge of disappointment at that. That I'd wanted him to frame it differently. "I have a life," I said quietly. "An apartment. Work. Your apartment was compromised the moment your father's debts became public knowledge. And your work—" He looked at me for the first time since we'd entered the house. "What do you do, Elena, other than paint?" "Tutoring. Art therapy at a community center. Freelance design work. All of it can be done remotely." "I don't understand." "You're going to stay here, not as a guest, as insurance. The Castellanos know you're here now. My people will make sure of that. And that knowledge buys you something. It buys you my protection. As long as you're in this house, no one touches you." "As long as I'm here," I repeated the words back to him. "You're trapping me. I'm protecting you. It's the same thing." Something shifted in his expression, a tightness at the corners of his mouth, a brief flash of something that might have been guilt. "It's not. You can leave whenever you want. You'll just be dead within 2 hours if you do." The bluntness of it should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself nodding slowly, understanding it as a fact of physics rather than a threat. This was the language of his world. Not cruelty, just clarity. "How long?" I asked. "Until your father's debts are settled, or until he's dead, whichever comes first." "And if he's dead?" "Then we renegotiate." He left me alone in the guest room, a space that was somehow smaller than I expected, more intimate, a bed with white sheets, a window facing the sea. Books on the nightstand that I suspected were there before I arrived. A painting on the wall, not one of mine, but one that could have been. A woman's silhouette against a stained glass window, fractured into colors. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what had happened. 3 hours ago, I was a woman who'd hidden from the world long enough to forget what safety felt like. Now I was property in a war I didn't understand, caught between my father's sins and a man who cracked his knuckles like he was winding up for something catastrophic. I should have been terrified. Part of me was. But another part, the part that had learned to survive on small truths and careful observations, was thinking about the way he'd said it. She begged me not to let him hurt her. He'd made it sound like my fear mattered. 3 days passed in the strange suspension of the house. Vittorio moved through it like a ghost, leaving trails of presence rather than actual interactions. I heard him on the phone in the study, his voice crisp and controlled. I heard him in the kitchen at odd hours, making espresso. I heard him in the hallway at night, pacing the corridor that ran past my room. He never came inside. I occupied the guest room like it was a sanctuary, which it was. There was an ensuite bathroom with heated marble floors and products that cost more than I made in a week. There was a closet that had, mysteriously, been filled with clothes in my size. Simple things, expensive things, nothing that required explanation. There were books on the nightstand that I started reading out of desperation, and then couldn't put down because they were impossibly good. Dog-eared and annotated in the margins. Vittorio's handwriting. Careful, precise, thoughtful. I was tracing a particularly detailed note, a paragraph about the symbolism of mirrors and self-deception. When he knocked, I jumped. He noticed. "I thought you should eat something that isn't from the kitchen staff," he said, and before I could respond, he was setting down a tray. Homemade pasta, fresh basil, a glass of wine the color of blood. My mother's recipe. I made it. I stared at him. "You cook?" "I do many things. Most of them are not legal." He said it without irony. Settling into the chair by the window like this was a normal conversation that didn't involve him admitting to systematic crime. I grew up in Naples before my family relocated. My mother made this pasta every Sunday. I haven't made it for anyone in a very long time. Something about the way he'd phrased that, "not for anyone," made my chest tighten. "Thank you," I said, and meant it for more than just the food. He watched me eat, which would have felt intrusive if it had felt predatory. Instead, it felt like assessment, like he was checking to make sure the meal was good enough, that I was eating enough, that nothing was wrong with the simplest things. "What are you reading?" he asked, nodding at the book I'd left open on the bed. "Eco. You have good taste." "My taste," he corrected, and there was something almost like a smile there. "I left those on the nightstand deliberately. I wanted to know what you'd choose." "Why?" "Because people reveal themselves in how they read, whether they understand what they're being told, whether they think too much or not enough, whether they can handle complexity." "Can I?" I asked. "Handle it?" "You're here. You're alive. You haven't tried to escape or contact anyone. Most people would have been screaming into their phone by now." He paused, and something complicated moved across his face. "Most people would have been terrified into submission." "I am terrified," I said quietly. "Yes, but not of me." He said it with such certainty that I didn't contradict him, even though it wasn't quite true. I was afraid of him, but it was the kind of fear you feel for beautiful, dangerous things. The fear of falling, the fear of wanting something that could destroy you. "Your father," he said, shifting. "Has he tried to contact you?" "No." "Are you surprised?" I wasn't. That was the worst part. My father, if we could still call him that after all these years of distance, was a man who'd chosen other things. Other women, other gamblers, other beds. He'd chosen away from me so consistently that my absence from his life probably barely registered. He was always good at letting go, I said. Vittorio stood, and I thought he was leaving. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out at the sea. My father, he said, raised me with the understanding that weakness was a currency. That if people saw you wanted something, they'd use it to destroy you. So I learned not to want anything. For 37 years, I've made that work. He turned back to look at me. And then you painted a woman afraid, and I couldn't look away from her. My breath caught. That was you, he said. In the gallery. The painting was you, but I think it was also every version of you that existed before I met you, the ones you hide from the world. How did you? Because I recognize fractured things. I've spent my life collecting them. He left before I could respond, and I was left with my pasta growing cold and my hands trembling because he'd just revealed something to me. Not a weakness exactly, but a crack in the armor, a place where his control had broken and let something real through. The next morning, I found him in the study. He was sitting behind a desk that was conspicuously clear of everything except a coffee cup and the financial documents spread across it. The study was all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and in the slanting morning light, he looked like something carved from that darkness. I want to paint, I said without preamble. I need supplies. He didn't ask why, didn't suggest it was a waste of time or a security risk. He just nodded. There's an easel on the 3rd floor, north-facing light. It was set up but unused. He pulled out his phone. Tell me what you need, and I'll have it delivered by tonight. You had an easel already prepared? I had it prepared when you arrived. I hoped you'd ask eventually. Something in that statement hollowed me out. He'd known. He'd been waiting. He'd prepared the space before I'd even asked, because he could read me that easily, read the hunger and how I'd looked at the world, the need to create that had been suffocating me. Vittorio, I said. He looked at me, really looked at me, his full attention suddenly trained like a weapon. Why are you being kind to me? I'm not kind, he said. I'm protecting an investment. But he was looking at the painting on the study wall, the broken woman I'd done no work to create. That must have existed before me. And I knew he was lying. The 3rd floor studio was everything I needed and nothing I expected. There was the easel, yes, but also natural light pouring through skylights that seemed to have been engineered specifically to catch the trajectory of the sun. There were canvases stacked against one wall, expensive ones, the kind I'd never have been able to afford. There was a mixing station with paints organized by hue and intensity. Someone had done this with care, someone who understood. It was Vittorio. It had to be. I spent the first day just standing in the space, unable to touch anything, afraid that using it would somehow break the dream. By the 2nd day, I'd begun to sketch. By the 3rd, I was painting. But the outside world was collapsing. I could feel it in the quality of Vittorio's silences, in the way his phone calls had changed, shorter, sharper, more complex, in how he'd started taking meetings in the study with men whose shadows I could see beneath the closed door, whose voices carried weight and threat. And then, on day 5, my father died. The news came from a text message from Marco Russo. My father had been found in a hotel room in Atlantic City, empty alcohol bottles and empty veins. The official cause would be a heart attack. The actual cause was violence, even if no one would ever prove it. Vittorio told me in person, which is how I knew it was bad. I was in the studio, working on a canvas that had started as an abstract exploration of color and had somehow resolved itself into a portrait. A man's silhouette. Dark hair, winter eyes, the kind of beauty that comes from controlled danger. Vittorio's portrait, whether he knew it or not. "Your father is dead," he said without preamble. I didn't drop the brush. That was the first sign that I was changing, becoming something harder. The Elena from a week ago would have shattered. This Elena just set the brush down carefully and turned to face him. "By whom?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me. The Castellano family. A message to your father's remaining associates that debts don't disappear when people do. They're inherited." He stepped into the room, and his presence immediately consumed the space. "You're no longer insurance. Now you're potential collateral." "What does that mean?" "It means people are going to start asking where you are. It means my protection of you is going to cost me, politically and financially." The implication hung between us like smoke. "Do you want me to leave?" I asked, and I hated how much I was hoping he'd say no. "I want you to understand what you're staying for." He moved closer, his footsteps deliberate on the wooden floor. "If you stay in this house, you're mine. That's how the world will interpret it. My responsibility, my investment, my claim. If you leave, you're fair game. Dead in less than 2 hours, probably in a very creative way to send a message." "So I'm trapped." The words came out hollow. "You've trapped me here." "Yes." At least he didn't lie about it. "And if I want to see the outside world? If I want to leave this house? Then I go with you, everywhere, every moment." He was close now, close enough that I could smell sandalwood and something darker underneath it. The smell of someone who'd learned to live with violence. "And people see us together. People understand that you belong to me, that what happens to you is a personal concern." "I'm not a thing." "No," he said, and his voice held something sharp. "You're not. Which is precisely why I'm not letting you get killed. And which is precisely why the Castellanos are going to get very angry that I've decided to keep you." The threat arrived that evening. The message came through one of Vittorio's phones, a small, encrypted device that I was learning to recognize by its distinct vibration pattern. He read it, and his expression didn't change, but something in the room did. The air got thinner, the light got darker. "What is it?" I asked. "A reminder that I'm playing with fire." He stood up and walked to the window. "They've found someone who knew where your father kept money. $2 million that was supposed to be filtered through the family. Now it's disappeared." "Did you?" "No. But someone did. And the Castellanos are blaming me because I'm blaming them for your father's death. And apparently, the universe has decided that we both need to be humiliated this week." He turned back to me. "The game is escalating, which means you can't leave this house. Not even if you want to. Not even if you ask me directly." Something was building in the air between us, a pressure system that was generating its own weather. I could feel it in how he was watching me, in the tension of his jaw, in the way his hands kept curling and uncurling at his sides. "How long?" I asked. "Until it's resolved." "That could be months. It could be years." I looked down at my hands, paint-stained and trembling. At the easel behind me with its half-finished portrait of a man I was beginning to understand would never be fully finished. "I'm your prisoner," I said. "You're my protection," he corrected. "The distinction is semantic but important." "Not to me." "I know." And he said it like it mattered that he knew. Like my objections had been filed away in the same archive where he kept everything else that was important. "But you'll adjust. People are very good at adjusting to the things that keep them alive." That night, for the first time, I heard him break. The crying came from downstairs, which is how I knew it was real. Vittorio was not the kind of man who cried. He was the kind of man who broke things instead. So when I heard the sound, Muffled and raw through the floor beneath my bed, I knew something had finally cracked in the careful architecture of his control. I found him in the study, in the dark, with a bottle of whiskey and the financial documents spread around him like evidence of some crime he hadn't actually committed. "You should go," he said without turning around. "I'm not company for anyone like you right now." "Like me? Good. Untouched by the things I've done." I closed the door behind me. That was probably a mistake. The house seemed to hold its breath. "How did you become this?" I asked. It wasn't the right question, but it was the one I needed answered. "How did you become someone who kills people and cries about it?" "I don't cry," he said, but his voice was shredded. "You are." "Not anymore." He stood abruptly, and I thought he was going to leave. Instead, he went to the window and pressed his forehead against the glass, his shoulders rigid, his breathing carefully controlled. "My father," he said finally, "had a specific philosophy about power. You build it by destroying everything that could be used against you. You maintain it by being willing to go further than anyone else. You keep it by never, ever showing that anything hurts. Is that what you've been doing?" "That's what I've been surviving by doing." He turned, and in the dark, his eyes were something dangerous and desperate. A man trying to hold on to the last thread of control while simultaneously wanting to let it all burn down. "Your father's death," I said carefully. "That wasn't your fault." "No. But the $2 million is my problem, and the Castellano family's retaliation will involve you. They're going to keep sending messages until I either defend myself or surrender. And defending myself means violence, Elena. It means I start a war because you painted a painting and looked at me the wrong way in a gallery. That's not my fault either. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. That's not how this works." He crossed the distance between us, and my body did something automatic and foolish. It moved toward him instead of away. "You should hate me." "I know." "You should be trying to escape." "I know." Instead, you're standing in my study at midnight asking how I became this person. His voice was rough now, barely controlled. Instead, you're looking at me like you understand something when you understand nothing about what I've done. Then explain it to me. He laughed, a sharp, painful sound. "There is no explaining what I've done. There's only surviving it." I reached out, which was dangerous. Everything about this moment was dangerous. The proximity, the isolation, the way my hand was moving toward him without my permission. I stopped just before I touched his chest. "Then let me help you survive it," I said. His breath caught. His hand came up, and I thought he was going to move me away from him. Instead, he let his palm settle against my cheek, his thumb tracing the bone there with a gentleness that didn't match the intensity of his eyes. "You can't help me," he said. "You can only save yourself from me. And you should. You absolutely should." But he didn't move away. We stood like that for what felt like hours, close enough to touch but not touching, breathing the same air, holding the same dangerous space between us. His hand stayed on my face, and mine stayed frozen an inch away from his chest, and the silence between us became its own language. "Go to bed," he finally said. "Vittorio, go to bed, Elena, please." So I did. But I heard him come up the stairs an hour later, and I heard him stop outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for him to knock, terrified that he would, and terrified that he wouldn't. He didn't. But I heard him spend the night in the hallway, and I understood that he was standing guard, not keeping me in, but keeping everyone else out. protecting me from the world that wanted to use me, even though that protection cost him something every second he stood there. The next morning, things were different. We moved into a strange, intimate rhythm that wasn't quite cohabitation and wasn't quite captivity. He took me out of the house, but always with his presence solid beside me, to the bookstore, to the market, to the gallery, to see my paintings still hanging in the space where he'd first seen them. And everywhere we went, people stepped back. People's eyes slid away from me out of respect for him. I was becoming a prop in his world, a symbol of his claim. And the worst part was that I didn't hate it. One evening, we were on the terrace overlooking the sea, and he was reading the same eco-novel I'd started, and I was sketching his profile on a small piece of paper, trying to capture the moment when his guard slipped and he just looked like a man, not a general in a war he was fighting alone. "I think about the painting," he said without looking up from his book. "The one you did of me." I froze. "Did I do a painting of you?" "In the studio. It's hanging where you think I won't see it, but I see everything that happens in my house." "I was trying to understand you," I said quietly. "Did you?" "No. You're still a contradiction. Violence and gentleness, threat and protection. The thing I'm afraid of, and the only thing that makes me feel safe." He closed the book and looked at me directly. "That's not understanding. That's feeling." "Maybe they're the same thing." "They're not. And you should be careful about confusing them." But he said it like a warning he hoped I wouldn't take. The Castellano retaliation came in the form of a car bomb. Not ours, one of Vittorio's business associates, a man named Domenico who'd been meeting with him to discuss expansion into new territory. The bomb was sophisticated, professional, the kind of message that came with a very specific meaning: stop, or everyone around you dies. Vittorio didn't stop. Instead, I watched him sit at his desk with a collection of phones and begin making calls. I couldn't hear most of it. The doors were closed, the conversations were in Italian, rapid and brutal. But I could hear his voice, and it had changed. It had become something without emotion, without the small traces of humanity I'd been learning to recognize. It had become the voice of a man at war. He didn't come to find me for 14 hours. When he did, I was in the studio, finishing another painting, this one less abstract than the others. A woman in a room with high windows, looking out at something in the distance that the viewer couldn't see. A woman waiting for something she knew might destroy her. "We need to talk," he said. I set the brush down slowly. There was something in his voice that I'd been dreading. "I'm going to have to be away for a while," he said. "Days, maybe a week. I've arranged for security here. You'll have 2 guards, and you will not leave the house under any circumstances. If anyone tries to contact you, anyone, you tell me immediately." "Where are you going?" "Somewhere that would endanger you if you knew." "How does keeping me in the dark keep me safer?" "Because if the Castellanos capture you, they can break you for information. If you don't know anything, they have no reason to keep you alive very long. It's faster that way." The clinical cruelty of it made my stomach turn. "How long have you been this ruthless?" I asked. "Since I was young enough to understand that sentiment kills people." "You're not ruthing with me," I said. "You're being gentle." "Yes." "Why?" He crossed the room and stood in front of my painting, the woman at the window, the invisible distance. "Because I made a choice," he said quietly. "When I saw you in the gallery, I made a choice to keep you alive, to protect you, to accept the consequences of that choice, which are very significant. And once you make a choice like that, you don't get to be cold about it." He turned back to me. You don't get to see someone as fully as I see you, and then treat them the way I treat other people. My breath was very shallow. I'm going to tell you something that I've never told anyone, he continued. Something that was supposed to stay buried, and I'm telling you because you deserve to understand what you're staying for. He sat on the edge of my painting table, and I realized that this was his moment of choosing. This was where control actually broke and something real came through. When I was 18, he said, I was involved in the kidnapping and murder of a man. I was given an order by my father, and I followed it. I didn't even question it. The man was another crime boss's son, about my age, probably had his own doubts about his life. But he was the wrong family, the wrong side of a war we were fighting. So I helped my father eliminate him. I didn't move, didn't speak. For 20 years, I thought that made me perfect for this life, that having no conscience was a strength, that the fact that I didn't dream about that man's face meant I was invulnerable. He paused. Then I saw your painting, The Woman Afraid in the Shadows, and I started dreaming about that man again. And I realized that I'd just gotten very good at not thinking about the things that hurt me. Why are you telling me this? Because you're asking me to cross over into something that isn't business and isn't strategy. You're asking me to be more than what I've built myself to be. And I need you to understand that the thing you're asking for, comfort, safety, the idea that I can be gentle, it comes from the bones of every person I've killed. Every choice I've made to survive this life came at the cost of someone else's survival. He stood up, and there was a finality in the movement. So if you're going to let me love you, he said, you need to do it knowing exactly what the cost is, not to you, to everyone else. He left before I could respond, and he was gone for 9 days. When he came back, he was barely holding together. There was a cut on his jaw, fresh enough that it hadn't closed yet. His right hand was wrapped in bandages that looked professionally applied by someone who'd done this many times before. There was something in his eyes that I'd never seen. Not exhaustion, but a kind of emptiness, like he'd burned through something vital and was running on fumes. He walked past me into the kitchen without acknowledgement and poured himself a drink with only his left hand. Vittorio. I'm fine. You're bleeding. I'm fine, he said again, but his voice cracked on the second word. And that was when I understood that he wasn't fine, and that fine was probably a relative concept in his world anyway. I crossed the distance between us slowly, giving him time to stop me. He didn't. I took the glass from his hand and set it down. What happened? I asked. We negotiated, he said. Very specifically, with tools and precision and a deep understanding of what the human body can survive before it stops being useful. Did you? I did what needed to be done, and now it's over, or it's paused. It's never really over. He looked at me, really looked at me, and his eyes were devastated. I killed someone today, Elena. Not fighting. A prisoner. Because he had information and his family wouldn't negotiate otherwise. So I sat in a room with him, and I extracted what he knew, and when he didn't have anything left to tell me, I ended it. And I was clinical about it, and I will be clinical about it tomorrow. My hands were shaking. But I'm not clinical about you, he said, and that's dangerous. That's a weakness. That's the kind of thing that gets people killed. Then don't. I can't stop. His voice was rough now, almost desperate. I've tried. For days, I've tried to convince myself to let you go, to get you out of this house and away from me. But I can't. Because having you here, knowing you're safe and close, is the only thing that's made any of this bearable. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and his hand was shaking. "I'm terrified of what I'm going to do to you," he said. "I'm terrified that I'm going to hurt you the way I hurt everyone else, that I'm going to make you complicit in everything I've done. That you're going to look at me one day and finally see the monster, and you'll realize you're trapped with it." "I see the monster," I said. "I've always seen it. And you're still here." "I know. And I'm still here." The silence that followed was the most complete thing I'd ever experienced. Everything else in the world seemed to stop and wait. He kissed me like it was the most dangerous thing he could do, like it might shatter him, like he'd been waiting for this moment since the first second he saw me, and had been resisting it with every ounce of discipline and control he'd ever learned. It wasn't violent. It was tender in a way that broke my heart, because tenderness on him looked like grief. I let him guide me to the couch in the living room, to the space where we could be close, but not yet completely vulnerable. His good hand was in my hair, gentle, so careful not to pull. His other arm, the one with the wrapped hand, was braced against the cushion, keeping his weight away from me. "If you want to stop," he said against my mouth, "you just have to say it." I didn't say it. Instead, I reached for the buttons on his shirt, and my hands were trembling so much that I could barely grip them. He helped me, moving carefully, trying to make it easy, and when his chest was bare, I could see the bruises, dark blooms across his ribs, evidence of violence that had been exchanged. "It's okay," I whispered. "It's not." "I know, but it's okay." He kissed me again, deeper this time, and I felt him let go of something. Not control. He never lost control. But the pretense of control, the performance of it, the fiction that he could be fine, could be unmarked, could be anything other than what he was. His hand moved to my shoulder, and he asked with his eyes before his lips moved there. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and I felt him breathe against my collarbone, like I was something precious and fragile that he might shatter if he wasn't careful. The most difficult moment came when his hand reached for the hem of my shirt. I froze. Not from fear, though there was some of that, but from the weight of understanding that we were crossing a line now, that what happened next would change everything, that I was about to give him something that couldn't be taken back. He felt the shift immediately. "We don't have to," he said, pulling back. "Elena, if you're not sure—" "I'm sure," I said, but my voice was barely a whisper. "I'm scared, but I'm sure." He moved slowly, so slowly that it was almost agony, giving my body time to adjust to the idea of being touched this way. His palms were warm against my skin, his touch reverent in a way that contradicted everything I knew about him. "You're safe with me," he said. And in that moment, surrounded by his careful intensity, his absolute attention, his willingness to restrain the violence he held inside, I believed it. Not because he wasn't dangerous, but because his danger was directed outward, not at me. Because every moment he spent touching me gently was a moment he was choosing me over the world that had made him what he was. When he finally moved inside me, it was with such tenderness that I wanted to cry. Not from pain, but from the overwhelming sense that someone was finally seeing me completely and choosing to stay anyway. His hand was still in my hair, still careful, and his forehead was pressed against mine, and he was breathing like he'd run a marathon. "I've got you," he murmured against my skin. "I've got you. You're safe. You're mine." Only once. He only said it once, and the next morning he didn't say it again. But it had been said, and it had been true, and it couldn't be unsaid. The attack came on a Thursday, just before dawn. I woke to the sound of breaking glass, and Vittorio's hands pulling me out of bed, moving me into the safe room on the second floor. A space I hadn't known existed until that moment, hidden behind the guest bathroom wall. "Stay here," he said. "Do not come out for any reason. Do not make any noise." "Vittorio, what?" He kissed me once, hard and quick, and then he was gone. The safe room was windowless and soundproof. Just a concrete box with a generator and enough supplies for a month. I stood in the darkness with my heart trying to crack through my ribs, and I listened to the sounds of warfare in a house that had been my sanctuary. I don't know how long it lasted. An hour, maybe more, maybe less. The concrete walls muffled everything except the awareness that people were dying on the other side of them and that Vittorio was out there with them. When the door opened again, I thought I was prepared to see him covered in blood. I wasn't. He was, and the sight of it, his white shirt soaked through, his jaw tight with pain, his eyes carrying that same emptiness I'd seen before, broke something in me that I'd been holding together. "Did they hurt you?" His hands were on my face, checking for damage, even though he was the one bleeding. "Are you, Vittorio? You need a doctor. The wound isn't serious." But he swayed slightly, and I realized it was serious. It was very serious. "But the Castellanos know where we are. They were trying to get to you. One of my men talked, or someone sold information. It doesn't matter now. They know you matter to me, and they're going to keep using that." "So we leave," I said. "We can't." "Why not?" "Because if we run, they hunt. And I won't spend the rest of my life running with you. I won't have you living like prey." He touched my face again, and I realized he was checking if I was real. "I'm going to end this." "How?" "With the only language they understand. War." It's hard to explain what happened over the next 3 months without making it sound like something from a movie. But the truth is that I watched Vittorio systematically dismantle the Castellano family's criminal empire. He didn't do it with weapons, though there were certainly weapons involved. He did it by being more intelligent, more ruthless, more willing to sacrifice than they were. He turned their own allies against them through careful manipulation and strategic violence. He exposed their operations to law enforcement at exactly the right moments to create maximum chaos. He moved money in ways that bankrupted their legitimate business fronts while strengthening his own network. And through it all, he came home to me, sometimes bleeding, sometimes broken in ways that weren't visible. But he came home. I learned to wrap bandages without asking questions. I learned to recognize which wounds needed actual doctors and which ones Vittorio would refuse to let me treat. I learned to sit with him in the dark when the weight of what he'd done became too heavy to carry alone. And somewhere in that process, I stopped thinking of myself as his captive and started thinking of myself as his anchor. The final confrontation happened at a warehouse on the industrial side of the city. I shouldn't have been there. Vittorio had been explicit about that. But I went anyway because I'd realized that sitting safely in a house while he risked everything was its own kind of violence. I watched from behind a shipping container as he and Marco Castellano faced off across the concrete space. Castellano had a gun, but his hand was shaking. Vittorio didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. "This is over," Vittorio said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Your family is finished. Your people are already making deals with others. Your money is gone. Your businesses are seized. You can walk away, or you can die here. Choose." "I'm going to kill you," Castellano said, but it was a prayer more than a threat. "No, you're not." Castellano raised the gun. Vittorio didn't flinch. I did something then that I've spent months regretting and never quite managing to stop. I stepped out from behind the container. "Don't," I said. Everything froze. Castellano's attention snapped to me like I was a solution to a problem he'd been unable to solve. His hand began to swing toward me. Vittorio moved. It was the fastest I'd ever seen him move, and when he did, there was no mercy in it. There was no restraint. He crossed the distance between himself and Castellano in less than a second, and there was a sound like a branch breaking, and Castellano was on the ground with his gun skittering across concrete. And then Vittorio was in front of me, shielding me, and his hands were on my face again, checking for damage. "You came," he said, and it sounded like an accusation and a prayer in the same breath. "You could have died." "Yes." "I couldn't," my voice broke. "I couldn't leave you here." He kissed me like I'd just given him something he didn't know he'd been dying for. And in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his war, I finally understood what he'd been trying to protect me from. Not the danger, the choice. Because by coming to that warehouse, I had chosen this. I had chosen him. And that choice meant that everything he was, everything he'd done, everything he would do, all of it was mine to carry now. 3 weeks later, we were in a safe house in Miami that Vittorio had prepared long before the war ever started. He had safe houses everywhere, he'd explained. Not because he was paranoid, but because the life he lived required contingencies. He required the possibility of escape, but I was choosing not to escape. "We could leave," he said one evening. We were on the balcony, watching the ocean turn pink as the sun descended, and his arm was around my waist like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. Right now, we could disappear. New names, new country, new life. I have the resources. I have the connections. "Is that what you want?" I asked. "What I want doesn't matter. What matters is what you need to survive." "I survived," I said. "I'm still surviving. And I'm not leaving. You don't understand what it costs to stay with me." "Yes, I do." I turned to face him. "I understand that people will always be looking for leverage. I understand that my life will never be uncomplicated. I understand that there will be violence and fear and moments when I'm not sure if you're coming home." I paused. "And I'm staying anyway." "Why?" "Because you came for me in the gallery. Because you learned to be gentle when your whole life taught you to be brutal. Because you crack your knuckles like you're winding up for something catastrophic, and then you choose to protect someone instead of destroy them." I reached up and touched the scar on his jaw, healed now, but still visible. "Because you're worth what it costs." He was quiet for a long moment. "I got the news today," he said finally. "The Castellano family is officially dissolved. 3 members in federal custody, 2 dead, the rest scattered or making deals with other families. The business is gone. The threat to you is effectively over." "What about the threat to you?" "That will never be over. There will always be someone. That's the cost of power." "Then I guess we're both paying it," I said. He pulled me closer, and his arms around me felt like they could hold the world in place. "I want to marry you," he said. Not a question, not a request, a statement of intent, the way he said everything. My heart stopped. "I know we barely know each other. I know this is insane. I know that on paper we're a catastrophe waiting to happen. But I've spent my entire life being rational and careful, and that made me empty. And you've made me less empty. So I'm asking, and yes, it is a question. Will you?" Yes, I said. The word came out before I could stop it, before I could think about whether it was smart. Yes. He smiled, and it transformed his face into something almost vulnerable. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you don't regret that, he said. You won't be able to protect me from everything, I told him. No, but I'll try, and that has to be enough. The wedding happened 3 months later, at a small estate in the countryside. Vittorio had wanted something public, a statement that I was his, that he was mine, that whatever darkness surrounded us could be held at bay by the simple act of commitment. But I'd wanted something intimate, so we compromised with something in between. There were maybe 50 people there, people from Vittorio's world, people who understood what it meant that he was binding himself to someone. They didn't come to celebrate love. They came to acknowledge power. But I didn't marry them. I married Vittorio, and he married me, and when he kissed me at the altar, it was with the full knowledge of everyone watching that I was choosing this, and he was choosing me. And whatever came next, we were choosing it together. The wedding night, he was gentle again, but this time it was different. This time, the gentleness wasn't cautious. It was confident. It was the gentleness of someone who'd stopped being afraid of breaking me and had started being willing to let me break him. He said, "You're mine," only once more, after, when we were lying in the darkness and his heartbeat was slowing beneath my hand. Yes, I said, I am. And I meant it in a way that I'd never meant anything before. But I also said something else. And you're mine too. He didn't argue. 6 months into my marriage to Vittorio Moretti, I was sitting in my studio, the one that now existed in a townhouse in Rome, because we'd decided that Miami wasn't far enough from the ghosts of his war, when his phone rang with news that changed everything. Your father, he said, coming up the stairs. He's alive. I didn't understand what he meant at first. Then I understood, and I understood perfectly. My father wasn't dead. He'd been in hiding, relocated by a rival family who'd wanted to use the debt that didn't exist, the one that had never existed, because my father had gambled away borrowed money from men who weren't actually in business, who were using him as a vessel to pull Vittorio into a war. It had all been calculated, every moment, every threat, every near death, orchestrated by someone with the patience and resources to wait months for the right moment. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you should understand what I've done, Vittorio said. Because I've known for 2 months, and I chose not to tell you. Why? Because if I told you, you would have insisted on using it to negotiate a peace. And I didn't want peace anymore. I wanted him gone. The implication settled between us like a weight. What did you do? I asked. What needed to be done? I walked to the window and looked out at Rome's ancient streets, worn smooth by centuries of people who had loved and been destroyed, and loved again. I married a monster, I said quietly. Yes. And I'm still here. Yes. I turned back to look at him, and I could see it clearly now. The monster, the power, the absolute certainty of someone who had never questioned whether he had the right to decide who lived and who died. And I could also see the man who brought me tea while I painted, the man who read eco with annotations in the margins. The man who'd learned to be gentle because loving me had taught him that tenderness was a form of power. There's going to be retaliation, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, probably not immediately, but eventually, someone is going to decide I need to be taught a lesson for what I've done. And I'm going to be right here when that happens, I said. You should leave. I'm not leaving. He stepped toward me. And I realized this was his moment of breaking, the moment where he'd finally revealed everything, and he was waiting for me to shatter. "I love you," I said, because it was true, and because it was the only language that could live in the space between what he was and what he'd chosen to become. "And I'm still here. But I need you to understand something." "What?" "I'm not going to pretend this is okay. I'm not going to forgive what you've done just because you love me, and I'm not going to help you hide from what you are." I paused. "But I'm going to stay. I'm going to paint this darkness, and I'm going to carry this weight, and I'm going to spend my life with someone who cracked his knuckles and promised to protect me, even if that protection costs more than I knew it would." He pulled me close, and his arms around me were fierce and desperate and grateful in equal measure. "I'll be better," he said. "No, you won't," I said. "But that's okay. You'll be you, and I'll be me, and we'll figure out what comes next together." 3 years later, the threat came in the form of a woman who looked like she had nothing left to lose. She walked into the gallery opening, a charity event showcasing my paintings that had become increasingly dark and complex as I'd learned to translate my life into color and shape. And she recognized Vittorio immediately. She was the sister of the man he'd killed 3 years ago, the one he'd extracted information from in a room with concrete walls, the one whose family he'd been quietly eliminating ever since, piece by piece, as they tried to rebuild what he'd destroyed. She had a knife. It was almost poetic, her rage, her grief, her desperate need for vengeance playing out in a room full of my paintings, surrounded by the visual manifestation of everything I'd survived to be with him. Vittorio moved faster than the knife could travel, disarmed her with a kind of terrible efficiency that looked almost like dance, and then he let her live. It was the first time I'd seen him choose mercy. It was also when I realized that loving him had changed him, not in big ways, but in the small ways that matter. He still killed people when he needed to. He still made ruthless decisions. He still carried the weight of being a man without conscience. But he chose, when he could, when it mattered, not to. And I chose, every single day, to love him anyway. As I painted in the Roman sunlight, with the knowledge that danger would always be looking for us, with the understanding that everything beautiful in my life was built on top of everything dark in his, I realized something that probably should have terrified me. It didn't. I was finally home. Not because the danger had passed, but because we were facing it together. And that was enough.